Some of you may be aware that in the last week, a recording has been found of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaking around the time of his acceptance of the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize. And what he had to say hadn't quite been heard in the same way before. It lasts almost an hour. You can Google it and find it readily, and I recommend it to you for your listening. I want to reflect on one aspect of that as a way to respond as a white clergyman to the words of Dr. King of 50 years ago, trying to prick my conscience and the conscience of people who look like me. Dr. King was saying that there's this question that goes around in the civil rights circles of whether there's been any change, whether we should be talking about how far we've come, or whether we should just say, let's admit we haven't gotten anywhere. And he addresses it eloquently, as you would expect. But the reason he points out why this is a question is because there are two things we're grappling with. One points to how much change there has been, but the other points to how there's never been any change, really. And I should say I, as a white clergyman on this Martin Luther King Day, want to recommit myself to working toward both of these issues. You could say, as Martin Luther King did say, that there's been change because it's much less likely, he said, that I would be lynched than people 60 years before the day he spoke those words. So there's been some progress, you can call it that, if I'm less likely to be lynched. But then on the other hand, not much has changed, because the same thing that made people want to lynch people who look like me 60 years ago still makes people today want to do other things to harm me and restrict me. And that has never changed. What is it that never changes? We open up schools, we open up housing, we allow people to vote as a society, but what never changes? The fundamental thing that never changes is that many of us who dominate in this society continue to believe in our hearts that we are superior to the people who are being oppressed by this system. That's what never changes. To use a football analogy from this time of year that we're in, we could say we make a lot of yardage gains on the ground. If you look at the game from the point of view of how much yardage we got, there's a lot of yardage. But if you look at the score, there never seems to be a touchdown for the other team, because the touchdown would mean that we admit that this whole game is silly, that there's nothing to fight over, that we're in fact all equal. But that's what never changes. And so yes, we have to commit ourselves to changing laws because those are important. But we also have to look at what's going on in our hearts, and we can't do one without the other. This summer, we had exposed in our city the ugliness of injustice against people of color. Black persons are much more likely to be pulled over and to be stopped than white people. Black persons, once they're pulled over and stopped, are much more likely to be arrested than white people. Once they are arrested, they are more likely to be put in jail. Once they are brought into court, they are much more likely to be convicted. Once they are convicted, they are much more likely to be given a longer sentence. Once they are given that sentence, they are much less likely to be given parole. Once they come out of prison, regardless of their record, everything else being equal with a white person, they are much less likely to get a job, much less likely to have a place to live. At every step of the justice system in the culture where people like me, who look like me, dominate, there's work to be done in changing the laws. But unfortunately, if we changed every law that was stopping and restricting people from being their entire best selves to be fulfilled and to have happiness on this earth, if we were to change every law, it almost wouldn't matter if we look back at history, because something deeper, something that's going on in the human heart that you cannot put a law against. You can't tell people in this country that they cannot believe that they are superior to others. That cannot be outlawed. But until it is somehow stopped, we are going to continue to see the creation of systems that perpetuate this kind of injustice. And so I today want to recommit myself to working for justice at every level of the criminal justice system, but also when I am alone in prayer with my God, to examine why it is that wafting up on the inside of me from time to time is the feeling that I am somehow superior. Why do I give in to that? Why does it float into my head? Why do I operate out of it? Why am I not continually rejecting those thoughts as completely false and baseless? That's what I want to recommit myself today in response to Dr. Martin Luther King, present in his words, pricking my white soul.